Seems that at the end of when I go through I can see that the other thing is the deviation I mean, like, if you've got an actual chip, then and of course you have to get it right. Yes, yeah, you could create people wide about that much in the area.
Oh no, we're having some logistical difficulties. Yeah, we're about to start. Yeah.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to see everyone so lively first thing in the morning. So this is the Security Dispatch Working Group, SecDispatch. I think our first meeting as an actual working group. So we're glad to have everyone here. Next slide, please. This is the Note Well. Note it well. It describes your rights and obligations with regard to IPR and the IETF process, and it's important, so take it into account. So, administrative things, blue sheets are circulating. Thanks to Ted Hardy for being our Jabber relay. Thanks to Barry Liebe and Chris Wendt for taking notes. Look forward to reading those later. Next. So, the dispatch process we're intending to follow here is pretty much the same as what you may have seen if you've seen the dispatch working group from the art in the art area. The idea here is to dispatch things, not to process work. So this working group is not going to adopt drafts or work on drafts. Our goal is to recommend what the next steps are for new work coming into the SEC area. And those outcomes, those next steps, have kind of a few broad categories. So we can suggest to the ADs that we direct work to an existing working group. We can propose a new kind of, I think of them as mini working groups, a focused working group on a particular topic. We can work with the ADs to propose AD sponsorship of documents, or we can say that this is not a topic that the IETF should be working on. It's go away. It's not something of interest right now. Maybe if you revise things later. So the goal of each of we've got, I think, 4 presentations on the agenda today, and so the goal for each of those is to come up with one of these outcomes that we feel comfortable with as a working group. Next slide, please. So this is the agenda we've got now. We are currently in the logistics and introduction portion, and then we've got 4 different topics after that to cover and to dispatch in sequence. I will do a brief agenda bash right now. Are there any additional topics or changes to the agenda anyone would like to propose? Oh, you should use the phone mic. Yeah, in the middle. In the aisle.
Between the tables? In the aisle.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
I don't understand how this stuff works yet. So this one is just additional agenda topic, application TLS. We had a working lunch yesterday, and there's a reasonably positive feedback on application TLS, and there's a sufficient number of people who want to discuss it today at SecDispatch. See what's through it.
So, okay, thanks, Owen. I think we do have time at the end of the agenda for this, and thank you for sending slides in advance. Are there any objections to adding ATLS at the end of the agenda today? Okay, then we'll plan on doing that at the end. Thanks. All right, and with that, we are on to our first topic, security.txt. Is Ed in the room to present? Great. Floor is yours. Thank you.
If you could just stand in the pink box there. Thank you.
Can everyone hear me? Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for the opportunity to... I'll just take that. Can everyone hear me clearly? Perfect. Thank you very much. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present security.txt here at SecDispatch. This is my very first IETF meeting, so I'm a complete newcomer. This is all very new to me, and I'm extremely excited to finally get to present my internet draft here at the IETF and to get some feedback. The latest draft, the latest internet draft, is co-authored by Yakov and me, Edwin Fadil. And basically, the premise of security.txt is it's a way for websites to present security policy on the web in an easily digestible format. Next slide, please. The file itself is just a text file that describes the steps that a security researcher needs to take in order to report a security issue to a vendor. And the format is very similar to the robots.txt file. And as we see on this slide, in particular, we see the directive and then we see a value. So for instance, the most important one here is the contact directive, and then a value. It could be an address, or it could be a link or something that the security researcher can use. As a security researcher, this is a great opportunity for me to see how the vendor will react to an issue, what steps I need to take in particular, and what forms of communication are available for me to report an issue. Next slide, please. The idea stemmed from my time in New York. I was recovering from DEF CON. And during the time, I was discussing with a lot of security researchers and members of the industry sort of various issues that one might encounter during the vulnerability disclosure process. And what we notice is there's no real standard across the board that lists all of these steps, and it's in a really simple format. So I just quickly threw up this idea, security.txt, published it on GitHub, but overnight, the immediate reaction was this needs to be standardized properly. We need formal language and need to make this into an RFC. So I wrote the first internet draft, and I published that. We're now on version 4. Next slide, please. And amazingly already, there are already organizations adopting security.txt and implementing security.txt files. Most notably Google, Facebook, Tumblr, Dropbox, Shopify, and very recently ProtonMail. This has been a great motivator for me, especially seeing how they implemented it and stuff. I could see what directives they would like to implement and how they use it, and sort of adapt that into the specification. Next slide, please. And we also created a little website at security.txt.org that gives you a more condensed overview of security.txt. So if you need to share the idea, or if you want to get quick overview of what the project is, rather than spending time reading the entire draft, you can use the website. And there's also a form there to generate security.txt files. It really demonstrates how simple the idea is, and that we can just really present it in this format, and hopefully further adoption. But it also increases discussion, and that's the beauty of it, is that a lot of people have given us feedback and questions, and we've been able to use that to adapt the draft. Next slide, please. And one question that stood out for me was, of course, well, we have RFC 2142. Why do we need security.txt? Well, the way I view security.txt is I don't view it as a replacement of RFC 2142, or at least the security @ prefix for emails. I view it as an extension of the RFC, something that is developed on, or is adapted to the forms of communication that we have today. So here are a couple of points of reasons why I did this with security.txt. The first one with security @ is, for instance, if you have a github.io page, we have some sort of service, some GitLab page or something, you don't necessarily have access to that security @ address, but nevertheless you would like to receive reports, so you might want to have a personal address. This security.txt allows you to just present that, and we've seen that with GitHub pages in particular, where developers have put their personal address and they're welcoming reports. So it's a great opportunity, to increase this sort of good best practice. Then another point is, I noticed this with ProtonMail recently. On protonmail.com, they have a security.txt file that points to an address on the .ch TLD. So if that security.txt file wasn't there, and I found an issue on protonmail.com, I might have reported it to the wrong inbox. They might never have seen it. It would have caused confusion, friction. Well, with security.txt, we're hoping to also reduce that sort of friction. I know immediately, okay, I see the steps, I know who to report it to, and I can follow those steps. Another thing is, we have different methods of communication. Not everybody wants, an email report. I've had cases where I've reported an issue, and they've told me, please use this HTML form, or please go and use this platform. And this would allow us to just quickly get to the point, get to the right platform, get to the right people. We're not wasting time communicating, possibly waiting for them to check their inbox when they don't really check their inbox. So really, to sort of summarize that, I view security.txt as sort of like a sitemap, in that it gives you directions and it points to various locations to gather information for disclosing a vulnerability. Talking about RFCs, next slide, please. Another one we have to talk about is RFC 5785, which defines the well-known URI. And we use that for security.txt for various reasons, but most importantly because we don't want to take up space in the root directory, and we also want to prevent name collisions, in particular with security.txt. So security.txt is supposed to be located under the well-known URI. Next slide, please. Then, as we've sort of described security.txt and stuff, and sort of the various aspects, I want to also highlight one issue in particular during the discussions, and that is, how do we verify the authenticity of the file? Obviously, that's going to be a very crucial point with security.txt. And there was a lot of discussion in the mailing lists and on Twitter and so on. And this is something that's still open. I'm still interested to hear ideas, because there are various methods, and there were lots of great ideas. But we're really looking for something that's really simple, because the philosophy behind security.txt is it's really simple to implement. So for all parties involved, we hope to find some sort of method that would make the process really simple of authenticating the file. So if you have ideas, I guess you could come up to the mic after the talk. If you see me in the hallway, feel free to give me an idea, or via email. I'm working on that. Next slide, please. And finally, so why am I presenting security.txt here at the IETF? I'm hoping that to get more feedback, to get more interest, because we've got lots of volunteers who made great contributions, but we want to really expand it and see Can we get more support from the IETF community and possibly groups and people involved to come up with other ideas and look at other aspects that security.txt could cover? So that's next slide. That's about it. Thank you very much. And if you want to contact us, the authors, the addresses are here on this slide. Thank you.
Thanks. Are there questions, comments from the audience? Anyone think this is a good idea, terrible idea? Mark nodding.
Mark Nottingham. So is the intent for this to be mostly used by people, right?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, because I had this kind of reflexive, don't define your own text format, and then I realized, oh no, it's for people, that's probably okay. Yeah, this seems incredibly reasonable. The fact that you have adoption, is awesome. So we generally try to encourage that. I've heard someone say that this should maybe go to the HTTP working group, and that's an odd thing, I think, just because it uses HTTP in some weird way. So I don't know if you want to do this. Sorry? I'm apparently asking an internationalization question now.
Could you relay that to the mic?
Ted is asking if you can have multiple texts in different languages, and I would say that you could use HTTP content negotiation for that, but you might say something different.
I'd actually given that much thought, to be honest. So that's an interesting thing. I have to think about that. Thank you for raising that.
Say HTTP content negotiation.
Yes, just intone that other name.
I think this is pretty straightforward. My instinct would be just to do it in SecDispatch as an AD sponsored or something relatively lightweight. Yeah.
Hi, Hirotaka Nakajima. I think it's good.
Yeah.
Sorry. So I think it's a very good idea. So I think it should be moved forward. And I think it's related to the Mark's comments. So is it there is any plan to have a JSON or like other machine readable format with the human readable format? I think it's better to have like both human readable and also machine readable. Then if some bots or find some issues, they can send the automated report to the URL or email address.
That's a great idea. We actually had that discussion initially. People saying, "Oh, it should be JSON, it should be YAML, and so on." Google, in particular, wanted that for their bots and so on. It's a great idea.
Hi, this is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU. Thanks for this. I appreciate the simplicity. So I support this, having something nice and clean and simple like this. I just wanted to note that your draft talks about web services and companies, and your example that you gave in front of the mic was about a GitHub.io page, which may not be a company and may not be a web service. So I encourage you to think a little bit about whether this is actually security for the website that's being offered or security for the project described by the website. Or if you want to expand it, make sure that you include those use cases in the document.
Thank you very much.
Phil Baker. Yeah, I like it a lot. I was just asked I got a draft I have to review for SecDIA on a similar idea for TLS that's being discussed in UTA this week. So you might want to take a look at that because we're getting into the point now where a lot of applications are having feedback on what to do if something goes wrong. It would be very good if we could get to some sort of consensus of doing this in a consistent way across protocols. And I would like to get us to the point where the feedback piece becomes like, protocols often have to produce a MIB as part of their outputs. I'd like providing feedback for it, your security is broken, to be something that is a standard thing that you have and is in our toolkit.
Colin Jennings, I love your draft. I like it as it is. I think we should move forward a AD sponsored of this draft. I think it's a prime candidate for that. I think you should ignore all the advice from the IETF to add more languages and make it complicated in weird and bizarre ways. Don't add languages. Like contact is easily understandable and the email address is in whatever language it's in, right? Like it will work for its purpose. It does not need to support lots of languages. It is already It is already machine readable. There's contact pull, and you can pull that data out. Like this is, and yet it is still also human readable. I think that's a great feature. And my bar none favorite feature of it is you got several major websites that just go camp on a code point in .well known, and they don't care the slightest about that. So super every way around.
Thank you very much.
Paul Wouters. So now we've had like 7 people think it's a good idea, so I'm doing the obligatory, this is a bad idea. I've said this, I've said this on the list already. If your web server is compromised, like how can I trust that there's a security TXT pointing me to the right thing? Sure, there's 100,000 abandoned WordPress sites that will have the security.txt file that says, oh, you should contact these people. But really, we have other ways, and sort of a third-party system where you can contact someone. We've got Whois or RDAP, where you can get the information. We've got a DNS zone that has like an email address in it. This really feels like asking a mail server, like, who can I contact? You're spamming me. Like you don't ask the person that's actually malicious to go, ask for contact. And throwing all kinds of external GPG schemes and other authentication schemes on it. Like if I look at a web server that's malicious to me and I don't find the security TXT file, like what do I do? Is this the attacker who removed it? Maybe it's the attacker that actually put a bogus one there and now I have to go elsewhere. So you can only use it as a really vague hint to begin with. Like it is absolutely no guarantee, and you're really better off looking for a more authoritative source.
Thank you.
Ben Kaduk, speaking as not yet AD. I've heard some people be proponents and suggest AD sponsorship, and I just wanted to sort of get a sense of people. We have this question of internationalization that was raised, and maybe we would decide to ignore that. And there's also, I believe, still something of an open question about what mechanism to use for getting some indication of authenticity and whatnot. And if these are still sort of open questions, would it be better to try to spin up a small working group than try and go straight to AD sponsored?
Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, which is basically kind of how done is this? Like, does it need another couple spins of work? That's where it would be worthwhile to spin up a small working group and have a mailing list and have some discussion. Or is this pretty much substantively done, minus a few nits, and it's ready for AD sponsorship? What do you think?
So with the fourth draft now, the way I at least view it is there are at least the major issue there is with the authenticity of the file, which someone raised just earlier. And I think in itself, it's something that I might not personally be capable of answering, and I need the support and so on. But as a whole, the sort of the directives, the contact methods, the feedback we've received from users already, that in itself I think is already set in stone, is already pretty well established.
Yakov Shafranovich says it's machine readable since it uses mailing field-like conventions. And someone in the back of the room says that Richard needs to eat the mic.
Okay, sorry about that.
Eric Criscorla, I'll put that on in a minute. Yeah, so I mean, I guess I do appreciate that there's security problems with having the website host its own thing. But I spent a long time thinking about this, and I'm not sure how to do a substantially better job without really having something incredibly heavyweight. Just to rattle off a few of the obvious options. You could digitally sign it, but with the key is probably the website key, which probably isn't much better. I guess you could shove that in CT, which would have some value. You could DNS, put it in the DNS. You could DNS sign it. These all seem like things which probably are the same, probably have the same security properties as the website itself. I guess I'm assuming the model here is that that the website probably hasn't been totally hackstored, but actually has a vulnerability which you found and you didn't exploit, or has a vulnerability which doesn't necessarily lead to complete website compromise, or hasn't been used to deface the security attacks. So my suspicion is probably from a security perspective, this is about as good as you're gonna be able to do without something really heavyweight that I don't know how to do. That said, I wouldn't be opposed to putting up a small working group. We do need to learn how to do that if we're gonna. Sorry, that part is AD. I wouldn't be opposed to putting up a small working group. We need to work out how to do that. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yaron Sheffer, you seem to be a little bit undecided on whether this is aimed at machines or humans, and I think there are actually trade-offs. For example, internationalization is much more important if we're talking about humans, and more importantly, the contact only really works for robots if it's an email address, not when it's a contact form. So you have to make up your mind.
Thank you very much.
So Martin Thompson, I'd like to put this question of robots to bed. This is a machine-readable format that contains, in the current form, a set of URIs. None of that is internationalizable text. The comments maybe, but I think we can live with that. And I think that in its current form, it doesn't need any internationalization support, and that's a feature, not a bug. And I don't think the machine-readable aspects of this is particularly difficult, like as Poppy said. So I'd be happier not doing anything to it in that regard. I might request removal of hiring, but that'll just cause people to put it back in again. So whatever.
Thank you very much.
Joe Hildebrand, I'm just agreeing with Martin. It already says it's encoded as UTF-8. It's got all the right language for that. And so, if the human who is writing the thing wants to say, here's the English version and here's the Spanish version, go to it. Like, it doesn't need to be anything more than that because, as Martin said, all the stuff that's computer readable doesn't need any markup.
Thank you.
So to date, it mostly seems like folks think this is a good idea, and we've had two different avenues proposed here about what we could do next. So I propose that we do a hum on those two avenues. So the one thing we heard talked about was, do we want AD sponsorship? And then the other one was, do we spin up a small focused, with the stress on small and focused working group to work out some of those two issues? So I propose that we would do a hum on option 1, which is AD sponsored, or option 2, which is a small focused working group. And do we have feedback on another way to hum?
Yeah, Martin Thompson again. The question is whether this group has it in its charter the ability to publish documents. This is very, very small.
No. This working group will not produce a document.
Yeah. So whatever. I have no opinion on the other questions then.
Yeah. So just to clarify, since I wrote the charter mostly, the charter is intended to be that this working group can recommend to the ADs for AD sponsorship, and they need to figure it out. So I think the way this would work out would be if this working group thought that this ought to be AD sponsored, then Ben and company and I would have a discussion about whether that was appropriate. And if they thought it should form a working group, then we'd have a discussion probably how to make that happen. Now I see a former dispatch chair here to help out here.
So I run a similar working group in a different area, and so what I want to comment on is to the people in the room about those are the two choices. Definitely, we're on the right path. What are the differences on these two choices? Okay, so what I think the people in the room, I'm going to describe. If you believe this, you should hum this way. If you believe this, you should hum that way. Okay, so the advantages of spinning up a small, fast working group is that it allows you to bring a bunch of people in, really debate some hard topics, have a bunch of email discussion, and then change the draft and get it out. So if you think there are some hard, meaty problems that people need to discuss, then you would do that. And by the way, if we felt we needed to add internationalization into this draft, I would definitely say we would probably need to spin up a small working group, right? Now, if you think this draft is pretty ready as it is, like, yeah, sure, we might have to, tweak a few things, fix a few language, do some stuff, then you'd probably lean more towards the AD sponsor. One other thing that you might factor in thinking about this one way or another is the experience of actually forming a working group, doing a draft, getting it out the door, having it public questioned, and closing the working group in less than one IETF cycle. If you can learn how to do that better, security will be a better area, okay? So you might view it as an experiment that way. But I think that those are the things that you need to think about in trying to choose between these two paths. Personally, I just hate it when we have like a new person bring a draft that is meeting the community's needs, is working fine, and then we all feel like we need to screw with it and muck up with the spices. I want tomatoes in, this person wants to add this one. Everyone tries to add their personal favorite technology into it. By the time it's done, it's too complicated to use. So clearly I'll be humming for AD sponsor this, but that's how you think about these two different paths.
Thanks, that's a helpful clarification.
So Kathleen Moriarty, AD. So I would add to that, while it was a good summary, some of the other considerations are, is this something that should have working group consensus? Because you get that by putting it through a working group. You could get adequate review through AD sponsored as well, because anytime I've done an AD sponsored draft, I very intentionally picked who the draft shepherd would be. You know, so if it's a security draft and there's internationalization, I would have picked somebody with that expertise. So there are different ways to balance it.
Speaking of review, can I just have a quick show of hands for who's read the draft? Please raise your hands now. Okay, that's a pretty good number. Yeah, you're on.
We have at least one person who thinks this is not a good idea, so let's have a three-way hum.
Okay, we're about to hum on 3 options. So just to present those options again, if you support AD sponsorship, that's going to be the first hum. If you support spinning up a small focused working group, that's going to be option 2. And if you support not doing anything with this draft at all, that would be hum 3.
Forgive me, but there was a comment in the thing which overlapped your starting of the hums from Yakov to note that there's extensibility in the draft with an IANA registry.
Okay, so if you support AD sponsorship for this document, please hum now. Okay, if you support spinning up a small focused working group, please hum now. And if you support doing nothing with this document, please hum now. So from how it sounded here, the first option, which is AD sponsorship, was the consensus in the room here. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
So now we need to talk to the ADs. You guys can talk, decide what to actually do with this. So thank you.
Yeah, we'll test the speed of the process. Yeah, so Eric and Ben will talk to you later about how to get this routed. All right, next up is Yoav talking about auto-renewed certificates.
Hi. So I'm going to talk about a draft that I and a few co-authors wrote. Called well, the first version came out before there was a SECDISPATCH, so it's called draft near SAG. Obviously now things go to SECDISPATCH rather than SAG. So next slide. So why are we doing this? There's lots of interest in short-term certificates. There's interest in the standards process, in ACME. There's a ACME star draft, in STIR, in ANIMA, in data centers, and in systems that are deployed that have multiple nodes that communicate with each other, either through TLS or these like some kind of certificate-based authentication. Well, we're not really interested in certificates being short-term. What we're interested in is in avoiding revocation checking. So the goal here is to get a document that tells people that this is okay to skip revocation, and also tell people what they need to do to make it okay. So next slide. So why do we want to avoid revocations? So revocation makes relying parties and entities more complex. It introduces a lot of modes of failure. It makes the protocols complex. You have to add stapling or add CRL and OCSP response to the state machine. Revocation makes the system more expensive. You need some kind of revocation server. It could be a serial distribution point. It could be an OCSP responder. And that has to be all the time available. Otherwise, communication fails. So revocation also makes startup time slower. You start the connection, whether it's TLS or IKE, and have to go to the OCSP server, get the OCSP response. Takes time. And it really doesn't make sense anymore. I've recently had to talk to people who are not security geeks and explain to them why we need revocation. And Of course, newbies always ask the best questions. That's, well, why are you signing blob A and then you're going to sign blob B just to say that blob A is still valid? Why not just sign blob A all over again? And said, well, historically, we used to have a human involved in the signing of the certificates, whereas the OCSP responses were just signed automatically. But everything is done automatically anyway today, so why do we even need this blob B? Okay, next slide. So we define short-term certificates as certificates with a short period of time between the time they're issued and the not after date, the time they expire. It's not necessarily the same as the not before date. There's a little discussion about that in the draft. And we avoided having a hard definition of what is short. Regular web certificates are issued typically for 1 or 2 years. In ACME, we capped that to 3 months. And then revocation is still necessary because I don't want some attacker to have a valid certificate for 3 months and there's nothing I can do about it. So to justify foregoing revocation, we have to do something much shorter. We're thinking 1 week, 2 weeks, or perhaps a lot shorter, maybe every day. So next slide. So imagine a system where you have hundreds of thousands of nodes and entities, and we renew the certificates every week, every hour, every day. There's no way to do this manually. Manual renewal is fraught with errors. A couple of years ago, even Google had a couple of hours where Gmail was had an expired certificate. I mean, Google has the best operations in the world, and if they can manage to get their certificate expired, anyone can. So, yeah. So it's fine to have manual intervention for issuing the first certificate, but renewal has to be automatic. And luckily, we have a lot of ways to do it. There's a standard way called we're doing in ACME, and there are all sorts of vendor-specific things. These are kind of protocols that I've worked with in the past. And note that this is a different definition than what we have in the ACME Star draft, because there it's limited to only ACME. Question already. Yes,
so is your document specific to does it define any extensions to ACME or advocates only the use of ACME?
Well, the ACME Star document does have, I think it has some extension for ACME, but this is intended to be either informational or BCP. Okay. No, it doesn't define any extension. It's not going to be standard.
Because the reason I'm standing up is because we use a standardized protocol, uses IETF technologies with lightweight M2M. It's used to manage hundreds of millions of IoT devices, but it's just probably not listed in your document. Right. But still follows very much the same spirit. So I agree that's a useful approach.
Sure. ACME here is only as an example. I mean, you can do it with CMS. Okay. So next slide. So how do we revoke with such a system? We just simply not renew. So if we renew the certificate every day and we don't like the certificate anymore, we just don't renew it, and after a day it's not valid. So the time it takes to revoke a certificate is limited by the certificate lifetime, and that means that relying parties have to take expiry seriously. I mean, this practice of having a 72-hour grace period has to go out the window. Next slide. So is this the web? Well, there's no reason why it's not the web, but the web is different from pretty much anything else. The web is a huge investment. I read some estimates that it was over $10 trillion invested in everything going into the web. There's commercial and non-commercial CAs, and they have expensive redundant infrastructure all over the world. There's CDNs, there's lots of stuff going into the web. So when I say something, this is not feasible in my PKI, you could come up to the mic and say, well, but we did it on the web. Well, no, the web is different. The web has a lot more invested in it. What's practical for the web is not necessarily practical for a small data center with a bunch of NSFs.
Yeah. So this is Tim Hollowbeek. As a former research scientist, one of the things that I think I'd like to see tweak about this, I love this. We've strongly advocated for short-term certificates for a long time. But I think some of the motivation is a little bit too over the top. And in particular on this one, there's no reason why it can't work on the web. Nobody should have to do short-term certificates on the web, but we've been trying to get people to move in that direction for a long time, and I think it's actually a great idea. Some of the challenges, you've listed some of them here, and yes, there are challenges, but that's something we should be looking at and talking about and discussing. One of them that you don't mention here is CT is becoming extremely common. Bringing certificate lifetimes down to where they should be, which is a couple of days, not a couple of weeks, is going to explode the load by, you run the numbers. We run 2/3 of the CT logs on the planet. That's going to make our expenses go through the roof. But, it might be the right thing to do. So, let's not talk down too much things like revocation and things like that and short-term certificates on the web. These are just challenges that we have to figure out how to solve.
Yeah. So part of the massive investment that we have in the web is a specialized working group that do only things for the web, such as Acme. So I'm not saying that it's not good for the web. I'm just saying that this is not the focus of this document.
Okay. Volker Berg here from PEP. We were discussing the same idea some 2 years ago, and we decided against it. And I want to comment on why we decided against it. However you do such things, it's needed that you have some channel that you get new versions of your key, right? So if the key is quickly expiring, you need a new key coming. And on the same way, on the same communication way, you can send revocations. So if you have such an automatic way of distributing keys, then you have an automatic way of distributing revocations.
Just to be clear, what we're talking about here is short-term certificates. The certificates can in principle reuse the same key over time.
Yes, the question is, how does the certificate arrive which is longer now, which is still valid? How does the new version arrive? So we decided for a compromise.
So as we've got the queue here, I think I'd like to keep the clarifying questions till we get to the end of the presentation. So if we could just keep the questions focused, please.
Yeah, Phil Baker. Actually, there's some very good reasons why you want to move to the short-term certificates on the web, and that has to do with the way that data centers work and how cloud systems work. And we recently had an incident in which a sub-CA sent a file with 15,000 private keys to a CA forcing revocation, and somebody was asking, why did they have them? Well, if you think about the complexities of managing the cloud with current certificates, that becomes inevitable. There's an option to dump out all the private keys.
Okay, so I guess the thing I'm interested in here, Eric Sperla, is are you expecting there to be some indication from the CA to the client that it does not expect to issue OCSP? So I mean, so presently, like presently, CABF, the VR, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but the BRs require you to provide OCSP, and they require you to have an OCSP endpoint. And so if you're doing now, not everybody, of course, is up to CABF, but nevertheless, that is an important concept. So are you expecting now some indication in the cert that this is a short-term cert and therefore does not need OCSP checking, and you don't expect to supply it?
Well, certificates have a way. If they don't have a serial distribution point, then they don't get revoked.
I understand, but at least in CABF that would be non-conformant. So
in the CA browser form, which is specific for the web.
I understand that, yeah, and I guess so. Your claim is so the way you intend to indicate that you're not doing that is you're not having a CRDP.
No.
So I think unless these are very brief clarifying questions, I'd like to let you continue.
I just hope this qualifies as a clarifying question. I really think this should be rescoped to revocation-less certificates and not as short-term certificates. We shouldn't standardize policy. There might be a lot of cases where we want certificates not to have revocation.
Yeah.
So that would clarify and take away a lot of discussion. We don't discuss what is short-term or not.
Okay, thanks.
Revocation-less certs.
Thanks.
All right.
Wanda, you okay?
I actually got that.
Well, let's say that for later.
I got that comment last time when we had Barboff, and the reason I kept the name star is because it appears in a lot of other places. Yeah, okay, so let's go to the next slide. So a few use cases, network security functions, like the things we're doing in IETF. You've got multiple kinds of security functions like firewalls and VPN gateways, and they're all communicating with each other through SNMP or a proprietary protocol. And the VPN gateways are also communicating with each other using IKE, and there's a lot of certificates to be distributed there, and they can be replaced because there's some kind of SDN controller that controls them all the time and can replace the certificates at will. So having them add also a certificate revocation check is doesn't look like a good idea. Next slide. Data centers are big and heterogenic, and yet they still do encrypted communication with each other, and we talked about that yesterday. To get all this TLS up and running, you need a lot of certificates, and something has to distribute those certificates, and there's usually some kind of controller or management function that distributes those certificates, and that's a good thing regardless of whether later you break TLS or not. So adding a PKI in the data center to manage these certificates, you'd want the PKI to be as simple as possible rather than carry all the baggage. Next. That's a proprietary use case. Has to do with my current work, where we have a lot of data clients, a lot of data servers, and they all talk to each other, and they all talk to each, and potentially they could all talk to each other over IPsec or over TLS, and but you have to authenticate them, otherwise you get your data deleted. So sometimes need encryption, we always need authentication. And the management server is some kind of a natural candidate to also run the CA, because it manages everything, why not the certificates as well? So next. Okay, this is an example from Anima, and since I'm not an Anima expert, let's just leave it for a few seconds. People who understand Anima can read that, and okay, let's go to next. So benefits. We have a simpler PKI, no need for distribution points, OCSP responders. The CAs can be pretty much fire and forget, and they can easily integrate into a management function rather than be standalone servers. You get faster startup of connection establishment. The end entities don't have to go to the OCSP responder. The relying parties don't have to do that. And it's simpler code all around. Next. So there are operational challenges that need to be discussed, and they're briefly mentioned in the document, but need to be expanded. So with short-term auto-renewed certificates, clock skew causes more failures sooner. If you have clock skew, you're always going to get certificates that are either not yet valid or already expired when they shouldn't be. With star certificates, it happens sooner. And yes, clock skew is a thing in 2018, not only in the IoT space, you see it in real data centers. A down CA will give you down nodes sooner rather than having the certificates expire over a year. They expire really soon. But that would be the same with revocation service. And there's a problem with interaction with certificate transparency, where you might be spamming the certificate transparency log with a lot more certificates than they expected. So next slide. Security properties. Regular certificates with the relied party checking on OCSP response is the best security, but many applications cannot live with the latency, so browsers refuse to do online revocation checking unless you have the stapling. That's browsers that exist today. So the second best is to have OCSP stapling, and the entity gets the OCSP response and then presents it to the reliant party in the protocol. And you can enforce it with a must stapling extension. Our claim is that star is roughly equivalent to stapled OCSP because we can make the certificate issued as often as OCSP responses are issued, so you can make the validity the same. All right, so next slide. So security challenges is that you can't just revoke. The certificate is valid until expiration, and you're stuck with it. The mitigation is by making the lifetime shorter. Even with revocations, both CRLs and OCSP have responses that are cached, so revocation is not immediate ever. And there's no differentiation between system issues that made renewal late, like clock steal or network issues, and real, the bad guys have my private key revocation. So we have to treat expiry seriously and no grace period. So, next slide. Summary. We don't need signed blob number 2 to validate signed blob number 1. Revocation checks made sense when issuing CRLs was easy while issuing certificates was hard, but Acme and proprietary protocols make this a non-issue anymore. Ideally, the lifetime of a certificate should be the same as the lifetime of a CRL or CSP used to be. And the thing we want is an informational or BCP document that says, A, that this is okay, and B, what parameters do you need to set to make this okay? Next slide. There is one more slide, I'm sure. Yeah, so we're looking for a home for this.
All right, I see there's already a mic queue. Let the discussion begin.
Hi, Melinda Shore. I've got a couple of comments, one of which might change what's actually going on with the draft, and the other of which just changes language. The first is that since the typical case for revocation is a private key compromise, you might rethink the language around key reuse and renewal, right?
Sorry, I didn't get to the last one.
Since the typical case in which a certificate is revoked is that there's been a private key compromise.
Mm-hmm.
Because all this stuff is automated, you might recommend, there might be recommendations about fresh, rekeying with every new certificate. I know that adds computational overhead, but it's a little bit more secure. The other stuff is that I really like this, but it's not going to change the CAD form requirements, right? They're still going to require certain behavior on the parts of CAs, including things like logging certificate issuance and so on. So be careful about language around that, right?
That's part of the reason why I want to make the web out of scope, but I'm open to suggesting about that.
I certainly understand that. I don't think the CAD form requirements for browsers, I think, are far more relaxed. But the CAs are still going to need to log everything. They're still going to need to publish to CT logs and so on.
Mark Gorichenkov, Curator Labs. So the main focus of the document, if I understand that correctly, is managing certificates in a local management environment, right? So data centers and something like that. Yeah?
This is the scenario that is the motivation for me, at least.
Within this scenario, do you understand that correctly? That you're just proposed to replace a management server, which is a serial distribution point, with a management server, which is a certificate distribution point. I mean, this way, all the drawbacks of revocation approach are still valid, because certificate deployment makes protocols more complex. You just replace CRL with ECME. And it makes the system more expensive because you need a certificate distribution server, which is always online. And actually, the requirements for it being online are more strict than for a CRL distribution server, because for short-lived certificate, this server should actually run like 24/7. It becomes a single point of failure in infrastructure. I'm not sure this might win the security versus usability usual trade-off. So here's the question.
There is a difference, because the envisioning a thing like the I2NSF scenario where there's an SDN controller, the SDN controller is there anyway. And the other thing is that issuing certificates can be done in a push manner rather than being pulled by the end entities. So if the certificate server goes down for a few minutes, it's not like the end entities can't pull their new certificate, because they'll get pushed a new certificate when the certificate server comes up. Whereas when you have revocation, the revocation server has to be up all the time, because at any point somebody might want to validate a certificate.
Okay, so I'm going to cut the line after Eric, and if folks could please focus comments on what you think the dispatch outcome of this should be, whether that's that we should not do this work or do it in a certain fashion.
Philhan Baker. I don't think that this should be an AD-sponsored draft. So basically, I think it's working group. I think that there's a very strong need in the industry for it. I've been pushing for short-term certificates. I no longer work for a CA. So this is happening after. I think that we need to talk to CAB Forum. Changing the CAB Forum rules is actually really easy. All it means is we just put in a ballot. I can't guarantee that it would pass, but I can't imagine that. So long as you have status within the 7 days period that CAB Forum mandates, why the heck? The technical challenge is going to be interfacing to CT. I think that there's a really easy way around that requires the CT people to rethink what they're doing. And when it charters, you'll have to work out some way of interfacing the two groups together if indeed CT is still operative and hasn't finished all its work at that point. But you don't want the two meetings to be scheduled at the same time.
Max Pritikin. On behalf of the Anima slide that was up there, they are very interested in the work, and it makes sense in their use case as well. I would like to bring up the point that was made around the complexity of the CRLs and the distribution of them, or the OCSP. This is a chunk of code we're talking about, which has been described as the most dangerous in the world. Simplifying that code, highly supportive. I think you should go to a working group. I'm not sure which one.
Russ Housley. So the first thing I'd like to suggest is that you use the no rev available security app certificate extension that's defined in 3281 to flag these certificates. Mm-hmm. Just says there is no revocation available. You put that in instead of the CRLDP or the AIA or any of those. And I think that a AD sponsor is also a really bad idea here. And LAMPS, it seems like a reasonable help.
Yeah. Eric Pasquilla, really will remember my badge on after this, I hope. I want to make one technical point and then ask a question. The technical point is that I see how you would think that this is technically equivalent to must staple, but it's not technically equivalent in one important respect, which is that it is possible to have a different OCSP signing key than a certificate signing key. So imagine a situation where you have a high security key which you use for signing because that's very important, but you think the OCSP mistakes aren't as serious because they can only occur as well as with signing mistakes, and that key can be operated low security. Now, for a CA like Let's Encrypt, who runs 24/7 and needs 24/7 access to its signing keys, that's not as big a deal. But for a operation which actually issues certificates relatively infrequently, that's a pretty substantial operational difference. That's not to say short-term certificates are a bad idea, merely that these aren't equivalent. My question is, it's not entirely clear to me what publication of this draft as an RFC does to change the world. So I think it would help me if you would explain why it matters if this draft is published and why it matters to go to a working group. That'll be helpful for me thinking about that.
Well, it helps me tell an auditor why it's okay that my PKI doesn't have an OCSP responder. And it gives them a bunch of criteria to throw at me. Say, well, but do you do all that?
So Daniel Migam. Oh, well, I think these drafts should be hosted somewhere to have some more discussion, but I definitely think it's an interesting move where we should go on with.
Ben Kaduk, just sort of a side note, thank you to all these people who have been saying they do not think it is appropriate to AD sponsor. That is useful information. It would be more useful if you said why, as well as just that you don't think it would be good.
Well, I think the obvious thing is that this requires a lot more discussion and more viewpoints rather than the two use cases that I have. And yeah, so this makes more sense to have a group discussing it. And in my opinion, LAMPS is a good candidate for that.
Okay, so we heard a mixed set of opinions on what to do and how much more work is required here. So we'd like to hum on 3 different options. So option 1 is take it to LAMPS. Option 2 is new working group. Option 3 is do nothing. Does anyone want to add an option?
I just have a question. If it's hosted in LAMP, do we need to recharter LAMP or? Yeah.
Yes.
Is there a LAMP?
Is there a representative of LAMP?
So as a process point, I'm not sure we need a hum here. I'll say why, which is I haven't heard anybody say this should be AD sponsored, and I don't think you all think so either, is my read. And like we wouldn't stop you taking it to LAMPS. And LAMPS will stop to the side if they want to take it. So I mean, I guess a hum is fine, but I'm not sure. Like it seems to be. I haven't heard anybody say they should go somewhere. I think the reason you didn't hum is like people thought maybe like it should have a working group versus LAMPS or something like that. But like, I haven't heard anybody speak in favor of that either. By the way.
So far be it for me to contradict my AD.
Oh no, please.
No, I wasn't going to actually.
So I'm not opposed to a new working group, but it seems to me that a working group whose only output is a BCP is kind of
yeah. So is there any, I think that we've heard a couple folks say LAMPS. It looks good. Is there anyone who thinks that's a bad idea and we should have a new working group instead? Okay, then we'll by unanimous consent. Thank you. Yes, we'll take that to LAMPS. All right, thanks, Joe. Next up is Mr. Housley. Talk about Merkle's re-signatures.
And another process clarifying question. So as the presentations are happening, if you could hold your questions to only clarifying, and if you want to debate, please hold that to after the presentation is done.
Hi, Russ Housley. Next slide. So the CFRG has been working on hash-based digital signatures for a really long time, like 2013 is when they started. And McGrew HashSigs has completed RG last call. To my surprise, last week, somebody posted a whole pile of comments that basically said, I tried to implement it, I got it working, but these are the things that I found wrong in the spec, which is perfect, right? But here we are at 10, and so now they'll be at 11. But I think that, hey, I got it working, and it is a really good place to be. But the interesting thing is that these signatures are quantum resistant. They're really fast to generate the signatures. They're really fast to verify the signatures. The validator is very small, but the signatures themselves are quite large. So signing firmware is one of the places that these things make a lot of sense. And I think that they're very important to start signing firmware now. We know from the SHA-1 to SHA-256 transition that it takes at least 5 years to deploy a new algorithm. And what I think we need to start doing is signing software updates with a quantum resistant signature so that when we decide we need the quantum resistant rest of the suite, we have a way to deploy it. If all of our software updates are signed with things that are can be broken with a quantum computer, then how do we deploy them? So let's start the 5-year process now. And anyway, that's the idea. Next slide. So I've been developing this draft for CMS to use the McGrew's hash-based signature scheme in parallel to him doing the development of the algorithm itself. And the large signatures amortized over a firmware package seems like the place where it's okay to use a hash-based signature. Using a hash-based signature to sign a certificate like we were just talking about would not work out well because it'd be bigger than the rest of the certificate by quite a lot. Anyway, the idea as spelled out in the bottom of the slide here is let's deploy this stuff now so that we can deploy the next generation of crypto when we need to.
Hey, Russ, quick clarifying question. When you say
Sure.
signatures are large,
Yeah.
how large are we talking about?
Oh, I should have looked that up. Can somebody look at McGrew hash sig for a moment? I don't remember the number off the top of my head.
Can I ask a quick clarifying question?
Yep.
I'm a little bit baffled by the use case. Firmware packages for post-quantum, so presumably in 10 years you will not want to deploy firmware packages signed today?
No, that's not what I said. You can sign them now so that when you need to deploy the next generation crypto algorithm, you can deploy them in, you will have confidence in the signature even after a large-scale quantum computer.
Got it. Thank you.
To restate that the way I usually say it, maybe this will help people as well. You need to verify only with the quantum algorithm because the classical algorithm you assume in the future will be broken. In order to verify with the quantum algorithm, you therefore need to sign with the quantum algorithm that the verification won't work.
Thank you.
By quantum, I mean post-quantum.
Right. Okay. Thanks for improving the words.
I think where this is interesting is particularly in cases where you have the bootloader in ROM, you can't change it, you're not updating the bootloader, that's where the code is, and then later, as you have the devices that you want to have out in the field for 10 or even longer years, then that becomes a challenge.
So there are architectures where you can change the algorithm in the bootloader. There are architectures where you cannot. I'm not trying to touch that. I'm not trying to tell people how to design their IoT devices. Stephen? I think I have one more slide. Okay. Possible ways forward is my other slide. So CMS seems to be one of the subjects going on in LAMPS. Suit is handling IoT firmware. I happen to chair both of those, which is so
yeah, the chairs can work it out.
yeah. I have a small preference for Suit because I have co-chairs there, 2 co-chairs, and so if I was to bring a document in, they could handle the consensus calls. Okay, that's my last slide.
So this is Daniel van Gilmore. I'm just looking at draft McGrew #sig to try to give a numeric value to how big. It says LMOTS signature. That gives 4 examples of LMOTS, and one of them looks like it's 8.5 kilobytes in size, and that's the largest, and the smallest is 1 kilobyte in size. So it doesn't look that large compared to, say, 8K RSA.
Kilobyte. Yeah. Normally when we're talking about these things, we're talking bits, right? So
yeah.
Okay.
So, Stephen Farrell. So yeah, I kind of like the idea of doing work on this. So a couple of
We agree?
We do agree.
Oh, cool.
Do you know where you'd like to be doing work on it?
Right, but that was the. I don't think LAMPS is really suitable because I think there's a couple of issues here that maybe Suit is right, but there's so Draft McGrew is not the only such scheme that
That's
the
correct.
is working on. So there would be some, at some point.
So there's also XMSS, and hey, I'm totally fine with somebody else writing the how to do CMS with XMSS document.
But I think doing this work, it should be done. At some point, there has to be an idea of picking between those two. In the IETF and the CF4G have done their stuff. Now, maybe McGrew is the right one. I have no hard opinion on that. Does your draft currently address the issue with the limited number of uses of the private key, or do you think that is within scope of what you're thinking the work is?
Do what to the private key?
So these signature schemes have a limited number of uses of the private key.
That's correct.
And that's a difference between other signature schemes.
Correct.
And so are you envisaging trying to figure out some way of rolling over to the next private key as part of this work, or?
So I wasn't, but that if that's the advice of this group, it's at least something that is talked about in the security considerations, but I had not divined a mechanism to go from one tree to the next tree.
So I think I would argue that if we're going to standardize something, we probably do need to tackle that problem.
Okay.
But I support doing it. I think suit may be a fine thing or something new. I don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
Bob Wouters. So I'm a little confused why we're not looking at CFRG to do the algorithms and then
they are done. They're done. CFRG has done McGrew hash sigs. It's in RG last call. I think I said that on the first slide. And they also did XMSS, and it's I think in the RC editor queue. So the point is, CFRG's done with the algorithms. Now let's apply them.
Okay.
Yeah, Tim Halvey. This is some of my favorite work. I mean, the post-quantum transition is probably the most important thing we'll be working on for maybe the next 20 years. I would prefer that it not get scoped to IoT, just because I think it has much broader applicability. And I understand, resource issues and things like that. LAMPS has a lot of other stuff to do as well. Since this is going to be something we're going to be dealing with, and it's going to be a lot of work, and there are going to be a lot of new people involved in this, I would actually suggest sooner or later starting up a post-quantum transition working group just so that we have somewhere to deal with this over time.
Phil Hambaker. I see this as a LAMPS thing rather than IoT. And if we need to get Russ a co-chair for LAMPS, let's get him a co-chair. And this to me is something that is squarely inside LAMPS, in that it's not just PKIX, it's SMIME, it's the whole stack. It's to do with the PKI interface, and I think it's LAMPS. Yeah, the IoT stuff maybe, but no, it's LAMPS.
Eric Scorla, AD hat on for this one. Yeah, I mean, speaking as AD for LAMPS, this seems like quite appropriate for LAMPS. I'm happy to try to find you a co-chair if you think that's necessary.
It's either that or you do the consensus call.
Yeah, let's not do that. I'll forget stuff. I mean, I think this, not speaking personally, I think this is like important work we should be doing. I'm a little sad to see, like, we're thinking about advancing 2 algorithms here. I wish the CFRG would tell us what to do so we could stop, not to think. That would be awesome. And I agree with PHB that like we should be doing a version of this for PKIX as well. If we're gonna do this, like, let's do it. I'm not enthusiastic about having a post-quantum working group. That seems like a rest. That's worked really well for like the sort of limited thing of basically hoisting, like changing elliptic curves. But like this is like a more complicated problem. So like, I mean, I think kernel's been great, but I think like more complicated problems like hoist post-quantum into all these protocols, and I think like that's going to take some real thinking, especially when we get to confidentiality as opposed to signatures, which really just matter of bloat.
Russ, on the one algorithm question, in terms, if you're thinking about what to add as a charter item, do you think it would make sense to charter, a deliverable tied to a specific algorithm, or tied to?
I would probably say CFRG approved hash-based signature algorithms.
Okay,
so
then
that
we can
both
have that
could come
conversation.
home.
Okay.
Right, yeah, right.
Conscience. I think this is really important stuff for many of the reasons you've done. If it is done in suit, I think it's very important that it is done in a way that does not in any way tie it to the suit framework, because I think a lot of the IoT vendors think suit's a disaster, but they do want to be able to use this. So it needs to be an abstract thing that they can use separately from that, because this is important.
So this is not a curve, and it's probably not deprecation, but we can recharter a curve kernel and change the name of the working group as well.
Change the name of the working group a little.
Yeah, I mean, it is worth thinking also. I mean, I was thinking about this, that I see they're doing through CMS. It turns out we have two other messaging formats.
and Coze.
Coze and Coze. It turns out that Mozilla uses Coze for their packet signatures, not CMS. You know, I guess one thing I'm interested in hearing is the Coze working group thinking they want to spin this up, or are you thinking of bringing it to Coze once you're done here?
Whatever the group thinks is right.
So I guess one thing I think that might be relevant is, like, I went through a document and seemed pretty thorough. Is it seems like there are perhaps some generic considerations that would apply to any messaging application of this, and then there's the, you know, how to frame it in the signature. Right. And I wonder if it'd be useful to, you know, I don't want to make extra work, but it'd be useful to either break that into documents, or at least to sort of, like, you know, like make the document like clearly say this is generic shit and this is like the stuff that is like only applies to CMS, so that, like, then if we want to do a Coze mapping, we can just point back to, like, this document and not have to, like, not have to copy paste it all, and, like, with, like, replacements of, like, crossing out CMS and writing Coze in, like, the generic pieces.
Well, it's the encoding is significantly different, right?
Yeah, no, I agree.
But it might be that the front part that explains the algorithm.
That's kind of what I was thinking.
Then you can do the CMS section, a Coze section.
Yeah, or either that, or you could, or as I say, other document could be, you know, please incorporate this shit by reference, and then here's the Coze because it's specific stuff. Like, I guess I'm just saying it'd be good if we could, like, not. It'd be good if that section that was generic, in fact, was generic, as opposed to accidentally being ungeneric, which I know happens, right?
Yeah, fair.
Dave Waltermeyer, SUIT co-chair. I just wanted to plus one what Eckert is saying. This came up actually during our meeting on Monday.
It did.
We actually have a couple of places where signing could be used in CMS to sign the firmware. We're also considering an individual draft that is a CBOR manifest that uses Coze as a container. So anything we can do to accelerate adoption of these signature algorithms into the various security containers would actually be a good thing.
All right, Russ, so it sounds like you got a varying set of feedback, but most of the feedback was around doing something in LAMPS.
Well, I heard LAMPS and Curdle, right? So depends on whether you want to address the other.
You and I could have had this meeting. Yeah, I mean, speaking as AD for both LAMPS and Curdle, LAMPS, please.
Okay.
So there you have it. LAMPS it is then.
Any objections to that? Okay. All right. Again, by unanimous consent. And let the notes reflect that the ADs should look into getting a co-chair for Russ and LAMPS to simplify this. All right, next up we have PEP or PEP or P isomorphic to P, however you want to pronounce that. So Bernie Fokker. Not sure where Fokker went, but oh, there he is.
Okay. Yes, we want to ask for where to put the trustwords idea. Yes, can we start with the next slide, please? Okay. Our background is we're trying to make using of cryptography for end users very easy, and it's more about email and messaging. It's less about the web, what we're doing. And we see that there's plenty of work to do. And one of the points we want to introduce here is the trustwords idea and ask to dispatch it. Next slide, please. We have a list of things we are doing in the PEP projects. wherever we find an existing standard, we are trying to use that. So I have to explain why we are addressing a problem here where there are already existing standards, because when the standards don't fit and don't solve the problem, we are trying to upgrade. And also where things are missing, in our view, we are trying to add that. In this case of trustwords, we have a list of standards, but no one seems to fit. At least we don't see them being used in the wild. And that is why we think that needs a new idea. Next slide. Just that you can see an overview of our work. We are doing encryption for email and XMPP, and we are doing that. We are addressing two major problems. One problem is the problem of key management, and the other problem is the problem of trust management, in different ways that they are addressed today. And out of the trust management idea, there comes the idea of doing what we call a handshake between two persons on end users' devices. I have to mention that we are doing everything peer-to-peer, so there is no server infrastructure we can rely on, and we are using already existing messaging transports like email or XMPP or anything else. And so we have no specific message transport we can rely on. We have also transports which have different ways of connectivity. For example, email is quite offline, so you get its replication and you get somewhere later you get a copy and you don't know if the other person is online already, while Jabber is the opposite. So the transports have different properties we have to follow. For all our concepts, we need to think about transports with very different properties. And so the concepts we're trying to introduce can be used for any of them. And today we want to suggest that we have the trustwords idea being registered, but then we need to explain what trustwords actually are. Thank you. Next slide.
So just to clarify the context here, so this is just to help people understand the context. What we're talking about today is specifically the trustwords draft.
Yes, exactly.
Whether that's
that is
useful
the
to folks independently of the rest of.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
So you want to
Okay, so I'm now going to explain you that little piece that's already documented in Internet Draft. So it's the trustwords. So you have the motivation that word lists are much easier to compare than hexadecimal strings. Like nobody compares like A, F, E, and so on with each other because there's no semantics to the user. So the use case is actually a comparison of fingerprints or some calculations thereof. The target audience is ordinary human users, and the method is basically a mapping between these binary strings and some words, the words that have a semantics. Next slide, please. So we have here an example. As you see in the first line, something that is no semantics, mapped into something that has semantics like doghouse, brother, and something that's easier to compare. There is previous work, even in the IETF, there are some free RFCs we could discover that had trustwords, or some kind of word lists to be used, for example, for one-time passwords, or the PGP word list, which is a similar approach. Next, please. So, but the new work is somewhat different. So, all the other approaches we found are mapping 8 bits only, which means 256 words. But our proposal is also to map 16-bit of a key of a binary or hexadecimal string, which means a little bit more words, like 65,000 words. It's a kind of a balance between the number of words that need to be compared and the number of words you have to register. The trustwords, they are only read usually on a side channel like a phone and only by humans. It's not like machines that are using them or that need to be typed in normal case. The concept is open to any language. All the other approaches use only English as a language for this method. So we propose to open that area to go to other languages that are used, because there are humans actually comparing it, and humans do not always speak English. We tried to establish an IANA registry for the trust word lists in different languages. It's a similar concept as, for example, in RFC 6117 or others, with an expert review and specification required. Next slide. So the issues that has been brought up on the mailing list was a translation between the trust words. We didn't quite see a use case for that, and to be honest, I don't think we want to go down that road. Another comment was that the words need to be cleared from swear words, as we documented, and there were mentioned the issue that combinations of normal words may end up in swear words. I don't think this is something that is really, really critical. We can try to avoid this, but well, it needs to be discussed maybe later on. Next slide. So, proposal to go forward. I'm not quite sure whether this is really working in SEG, that we can like keep it there and discuss it further. I'm not sure what SEG is the purpose, because I can't find it in the tracker what nowadays the case. But my idea would be, or our idea would be, to put it to SEG, discuss it there, put it there for discussion until we find another group that can be the home for this work, or even maybe continue and finish it in SEG if that is possible. And open for other suggestions, could also be a short-term working group or AD sponsored, maybe. But let's hear from the folks.
Just a clarifying question, keeping it in SAG will not get it published. Some other step needs to happen.
Okay. How about the intermediary home there to be discussing it and further on?
No, discussion.
See whether an AD is sponsoring it later on out of SAG or something. Is that an option? Or?
Right, that would be an option. And
okay, yeah.
We'll talk a little more. But yeah, discussing more on SAG will not result in its publication.
Okay.
Hello, Phil Hambaker. I like this work. I'm very supportive of it. I did something very similar. What I did was generated a Merkle tree of my trust words. And the advantage that you can then get from that is, if you're in the case where you're trying to verify a hash or whatever, you can provide if you know the apex of the tree for the trust word dictionary, you can have a dictionary in the cloud that will tell you which can provide a verification that this is the correct representation of a particular trust word list without the client having to have every trust word value. And where that will then help you with is, if you have one translation, 65,000 words may be acceptable on the device. If you've got 32 different languages of 65,000 words, well, then it becomes impractical. So you can use the dictionary in the cloud approach. So anyway, it becomes a little bit more complicated, but it's something that may be worth putting in there. And so maybe it goes into working group rather than AD, but
I think that's an idea. It will probably not be used in the PEP project because we avoid all central infrastructure. But I think for other applications, it could be an addition.
Valery Smyslov, LS Plus. I think that internalization problem is more complex than you think, because, for example, if two humans want to communicate and they speak different languages, then translation trust words into different languages won't help, because they just don't know each other's language. And otherwise, if they communicate pronouncing just digits, the dictionary is much smaller. Well, they can understand and they are able to communicate, at least. So it's not enough to translate transword into different languages. Then you separate humans that can communicate between themselves into parts, into those parts that know this exact language the same.
Okay. I'm not sure if I understand you right. But that's all. Please feel invited for the discussion later on, because that is a discussion of how to do it. Actually, today we avoid any translation, because it's only important that if you decide for a language as two people communicating to each other, that they decide for the same language. And usually people sending messages to each other do already, because that's a message, that's a language they write the message in, right? And because of that, you can have a completely different list of trust words in your language, and it does not matter. There's no need to translate it into any other language. And that is, I think, what you meant with the use case for translations. But please feel invited for the later discussion. I would be happy to hear. Thank you.
So, Martin Thompson, just a short note on the swear words thing. Moist. You can pick any word from any list anywhere and attribute all sorts of interesting connotations on it. And I learned this. This is something that you learn where I come from.
We can have separate ENUS and ENAU lists.
Precisely. But I got up to make a more substantive point, and that is that with a history of using humans as intermediaries for carrying cryptographic information, and they're notoriously unreliable. And we did this with passwords, right? We used the human to carry some information from point in time to other point in time. And we do everything we can in this organization to avoid relying on these pieces of meat that aren't very effective at carrying any significant amount of entropy. And you're actually talking about now using humans as intermediaries for protocols, essentially. And that makes me extremely nervous. I'm not sure that you're going to get the security properties that you're looking for.
Well, if I may answer that, it's more or less that I share that view, by the way, but so that's the full scope of the PEP project why we're doing it, or we wouldn't do it. We have here one piece of work to do, which is, we are not adding use cases where we put that piece of meat into the process. We're doing the other way around. We are removing them wherever we can, and we have something which we don't get rid of, which is like people comparing their fingerprints, right? And so we are providing an alternative which could actually work better in our view for everyone. That's all.
I guess this is just a disagreement about the virtue of comparing fingerprints.
Yes.
And to be clear, this work, as I think Volker was saying, is not about creating use cases for comparing fingerprints. It's about trying to have better mechanisms for doing that when it's necessary.
This is Jeffrey Yaskin. This is Jeffrey Yaskin. I really like the idea of standardizing a word list to represent binary strings effectively. I'm nervous that you've scoped it down to only converting from the binary string to the word list by not requiring that every language have the full 65K words. And I wonder if this should go to a working group that thinks about kind of that full topic rather than only fingerprint comparison. Let's see. Yeah.
I think you hit a point, and we're already dealing with that. We have ideas as part of the trust words concept, how to deal with the fact that we may have, let's say, a collision. For example, I have a language with less than 65,000 words. Then in this case, I need to use the same word for two different numbers, right? It's unavoidable. And so the idea how to deal with that is as seeing it as a collision. So we subtract entropy and still care that at least 128 bits of entropy are left. Usually this is possible with common hashes. So that's the basic idea how to deal with that.
Did you have a working group suggestion?
I don't know the list of working groups well enough to have a particular one.
But again, an invitation if you have better ideas.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore from the ACLU. In contrast to Martin, I do believe that it's important that we think about how these pieces of meat are integrated into these protocols. So I thank you for having that focus. That said, I am not convinced that 16-bit word lists make sense in any human language. I have a couple of data points here gathered from the most reliable of sources, the internet, about how many words there are in different languages. And the fourth most prolix language is Russian with 130,000 words. And I want to point out that most people don't have a vocabulary that covers their entire language. So already after 4 languages, we're down to a language where you have to know half of all of the words to be able to understand any given word list. And if you want the meat to be in the loop, the meat has to understand the word. And so I'm concerned that the size that you've chosen is going to make the meat unable to cope. And I just want to point out that the combination question is about how the combinations work is valid. I saw the trust words demonstration at the last IETF. Thank you for that. It was a PEP demonstration that included trust words. And the trust words that came up during the demonstration had contiguously Gilmore Madman.
Joe Hildebrand. So this is the second time that I saw you guys talking art, and so the hat I have on here is from the XMPP community. You have XMPP on your slides, and you have PEP on your slides. In XMPP land, PEP is JEP 163, which is the personal eventing protocol, and it's really pretty widely used in a variety of things. And so, like, if you're going to interact with the XMPP stuff at all, I would suggest thinking about that at least a little bit. If we were to chart a work here at the IETF that said XMPP and had PEP in it, I would expect us to get a liaison statement from the XMPP Standards Foundation.
So just to be clear, the scope here is only the trust words draft.
Got it, but it had PEP all over the things. And so I'm just, hey, warning on the name, like that's likely to cause some friction.
Okay, thank you for the warning. Didn't know that.
Eric Wishburla, I had a couple of questions about the intended scope of this general work, which I may step a little over your line here, Richard, but I hope you'll give me a little room. Are you intending to bring all the PEP work to IETF at some point? I mean, you don't have the answer now, but it's important.
Yes.
Huh?
I think so. So we have the idea to register to make applications compatible. So I think the answer is yes.
Well, I guess the reason I'm asking this question is because if what's going to happen is you're going to like dribble out like one little spec at a time and we can dispatch each of them, but they're all part of some integrated whole, that is not typically the way we try to do the work. And so I'm trying to figure out like if like what's going to happen is what you really want is to bring all PEP here, then a different course of action is appropriate than if you like want to standardize 1 or 2 pieces of it. So, I mean, you don't have the answer now, but that's important for us to determine what to do.
You know, we see PEP as like a toolbox, and we are publishing everything anyway, and we're publishing everything. Our implementation always has free software, so I personally don't think there can be or there is a discussion needed what we will publish, because we publish anything and without exception. But I don't know where other, this is about interoperability, of course, so I don't know what other people want to take out of that toolbox, right? And so that made the idea that we publish things as fractions, if you want to. I'm not sure if I understand you right, but I
don't think you're really addressing my question. I mean, you have like 10 drafts, and in the art dispatch, I got the impression you intended to bring the work in general to IETF, and that was why you had so many drafts. And so I'm trying to understand is your intent to come to IETF and ask for that? Yeah, for this like eye chart is your intent to ask to bring this work generally to IETF? The way it's like, we have other working groups that attempt to build like systems. So like RTC Web, which has a collection of like documents which all work together to build a system, right? And so one thing we do is when we have a piece of technical work that is relevant to RTC Web, it might get cited in RTC Web, even if like you might, even if like we might have could have spun up a separate working group to do that work because it made sense to integrate into that whole. And so I'm trying to understand, do you intend to bring all of this work to us? Or are you intending only to bring a couple of things to us that you'd like to standardize that you think are independently useful?
And do you mean, so just to kind of clarify what Ecker's asking is your implication there that if we're going to have a discussion about the whole picture later, maybe the trustworthy thing should hold and be part of that discussion?
Yes, that's where I'm going with that.
Okay, I already learned that I'm still quite new to the IETF. Okay, I already learned that there are things which are matching the needs of IETF. For example, when we define formats or when we define protocols, and this trustworthy thing is more going to a registry thing, I guess. And other things I already learned do not match the scope of the IETF. For example, what we are doing in the user interface, I learned will not be part of IETF
but there are a collection of things here that look like protocol documents to me.
Yes. So the answer to that question is, I think we will try to introduce the parts we think could help other projects too, and that is what we will bring here. So we don't intend to bring everything. Press anything.
But to restate what Ecker's saying, I think the feedback is you have a collection of things. You're definitely making some decisions about what might be in scope, out of scope for the IETF. But part of the recommendation is don't piecemeal it. Don't bring one draft. Bring in the collection of things you think the IETF should be working on together and talking about it together instead of as an individual.
Okay, that's great. I take that as a great offer, by the way.
So I guess So maybe that poses the question, but a smaller scale version of the same question is, this document doesn't actually define any trust words. This document just defines, like, as far as I can tell, algorithms for how you're supposed to manage the trust words. That is of modest usefulness. Are you planning to also define the trust word? Are you planning to also bring a trust word list to the IETF for any language at all? Well, I'm just trying to figure out what's a useful component. I mean, like to be frank, just to be absolutely frank about this, like the idea of taking a 128-bit or string and cutting up to pieces and looking at a word list is very well known. And so, like, we don't really need a document that doesn't actually define, like, the words themselves, because, like, that doesn't actually help me very much.
No, I'm not sure whether I understood your question correctly, but this document is basically defining the IANA process to register trust words, which has to be somewhat in advance before we can bring the trust words, or we can bring them at the same time. But there will be definitely documents that register these kind of trust words.
Sure, I guess I don't think, I guess, yes, I'm not, like, blown away by registering the registry. Like, let's just think about this perspective of a different protocol, say PGP, right? Sorry. Let's think with the perspective of a protocol like PGP. Say PGP wished to adopt a new set of trust words that didn't like the old PGP trust words. Like, this document would not assist them in that endeavor in any way. And what would assist them in that endeavor would be having a list of trust words they could point to. And so I'm trying to understand is, like, again, like, what is the semantic content of the unit you were asking us to adopt? And the semantic content is merely the creation of the registry. That seems like not very useful. The semantic content is the creation of a registry seeded with words for some common languages. That seems like a potentially useful contribution.
I'm going to cut the mic line after Colin.
Yeah, Phil Hanbaker. Yeah, you seem to have this 16-bit chunking hard-coded. I use 32. I use 15 bits because I use basic 32 encoding for my fingerprints. So for me, something that goes in units of 15 works better with my fingerprints than something that works in chunks of 16. Maybe a way forward here would be to look at the draft and work out some way of refactoring it so that the registry proposal makes it easy to, is a little bit more general, so that besides putting words in, I would like to put images in. If I had a dictionary of 65K images, I could use those for comparison of equality of two fingerprints without having to bother about the internationalization thing. Yeah, how many of them are cats? Well, you would have to curate the images, is where it would become, you wouldn't want to have too many of them be the same sort of image.
I think that would be a total different application. You can do that, of course, but you know, we are talking about an audio channel, which is usually used as the side channel. So how do you describe 65,000 different images on an audio channel?
Well, my point is that all you need to have in the IANA registry, at minimum, is to know the content type of the unit and the SHA-2 hash of the APEC, of the list of words. If you have that information, you've then got a fix for verifying. And if you then got a link somewhere that allows somebody to link to the list of words, if it's public, then you've got a generic way of using the public words. So I think that we can get around the need to do a lot of stuff inside IETF by pushing it all into the registry, if we're a bit clever about how we use the registry.
Valery Smyslov, LS Plus. One comment that correlates with what DKG said, and you map a 16-bit binary values to dictionary of words. So it means that your dictionary is 65,000 words, consists of 65,000 words approximately. It's quite a lot for an average human to know. An average human active dictionary is about several thousand words, and passive dictionary is probably 10 to 20 to probably 30,000 words. 65,000 words, it's for linguists. And in your proposal, well, it's okay for that human who reads these words or phone channel. But on the other side, the other human must understand them. And if he just knows this word, doesn't know this word, he won't understand them. So it will be very error-prone, because human on the same side just can't know that many words. An average human.
I'm not quite sure whether I understand what you just said.
Let me just paraphrase slightly. A 65,000 word dictionary would be an amazing vocabulary for most humans to have. That's way too many words. Most humans are in these small numbers of thousands in most languages. But yes, yeah. So I think So let me switch for a second here. Colin Jennings, you're talking about the wrong thing. The whole group of us right now are talking about the wrong thing. We're talking about this work, and that's not what we need to do here. What we need to talk about is what's the problem we're trying to solve and where we're going to solve it and get it done, and whether we should do it. Now, I haven't heard anyone speak to, this work should never happen, kill it. It's certainly too confused and too many different things going on to possibly consider AD sponsoring it, okay? So what you need to do next on this, my opinion, is that somebody needs to write up a small charter and discuss it of what the work would be done by some working group that could take on dealing with whatever it is you think you're doing here, because you clearly don't agree on what you think you're doing or what the scope of it is or how big it is or how it isn't. And the reason is because no one's written down a chart. So that would be, I think, that the next step that for getting this to go anywhere. I don't even think you could take a hum on whether people think this should be a mini working group or not, because no one even knows what we'd be talking about as a mini working group, what its scope would be. There's very different viewpoints on it. And in general, it would be good if when things came to this group that had the possibility of perhaps being a working group, that one of the things that you had that was being talked about and brought forefront would be a potential draft charter that got everyone in scope on what the work is. Does that make sense? Do you guys agree with that, or?
Do you mean the charter only on the trust words or also on
that's exactly the point. Charter what? What is it you think we should be charter? We don't know what you're asking us to charter. We have no idea. And all the different people who have come up to the microphone have had somewhat varying different ideas, or I have not been able to understand what they thought that the scope of the work was. Right? And you're getting that too. You don't know which one of those boxes on that picture you're even asking the IETF to do.
Actually, it's the one that has this purple circle around.
Okay, they're not going to do that because that makes no sense by itself. You're going to have to make it bigger than that, or they won't do it.
So, for example, to include all the red stuff.
Maybe.
Or do you even think that the charter would include all the work with different work items? Which I think would...
I think that the answer, whether they're going to do it or not, can't be answered unless you can ask the question on the scope of it. Is it everything? Is it some set of that? I mean, it seemed to me a logical charter would be a group to form... This is just one possible charter. Maybe this isn't the one you want, but is a group to come up with a a group that fixes the problem of taking a binary string and producing a trust list of words. It would include the words and selection of the words as well, right? That'd be a very generic product that lots of people could use and had value. We're going to have a random idea for a list of words. Like that's not going anywhere. That's not enough, right? So that would be the trust part of it. Another part that I heard some people speak to was, well, how you took that tool and used it in different protocols was also of value. So some people might want to do that. Should that be in the charter? Should that be a different charter? I don't know. I don't have an opinion on that. But I think you have to very crisply say that before you ask the question, should we do it or not? I'm not getting waved off.
Thank you.
David Black, turns out I got up here to +1 Pluffy's first suggestion. Figure out what the minimally useful protocol is that uses trust words to get a secret from to get this big binary string from point A to point B, and write up the protocol, what it solves, what its assumptions are, what you must not do with it. And that then becomes a work item that can be concretely chewed on and figure out what to do with.
Okay, so to test the summary of some of this conversation, what we heard was interest in the concepts you're presenting. Some folks had very specific ideas on a very narrow piece of it relative to kind of trust words. There's perhaps something there, but a lot of the feedback was also relative to it's hard to consider the specific trust word idea without the bigger context of what's kind of happening in PEP. And that broader context would be informative to perhaps talk about the more specific thing as well. So regardless of kind of all that, more discussion seemed like it was required for next step, and a lot of it had to do with specificity on the bigger context. And so a lot of what you were saying in the beginning, SAG discussion makes sense. You know, what we heard here at the mic was more discussion, more clarity on what the bigger thing is that you're trying to do. So I will test that as my understanding if folks want to disagree with my summary of that.
So to paraphrase that, there's no concrete action for now. We continue to have some discussion on SAG, and it would be helpful if we could have some scope discussion, perhaps some proposed charter text. That sound all right? On SAG or AD's SAG, sec dispatch, where you want to have it.
If you're discussing the technical details of how this works in various parts of it, I could care less where you detect it. Maybe I'm sure Ecker will have more things. But if you're discussing how we're going to charter some work that does this, and we're discussing a charter, I think that should be on this working group list. That is the purpose of this working group. And I think you should stop discussing the technology on this list. You should discuss what is the problem and the scope that you're going to solve.
I agree with that. Does that sound clear to you guys? So let's get the discussion on the problem we're trying to solve and what the scope of the work would be, as opposed to the technical details, and have that on the sec dispatch list. Does that make sense? Ecker, did you have?
So I guess I would say it depends, and I'll try to give you my it depends. To the extent to which this is, relatively, I'm just thinking ahead a little bit. To the extent to which this is a relatively contained thing, which we wish to do, which has relatively like, which you're thinking about chartering, then it's probably appropriate to have a discussion in the sec dispatch list. The extent to which you're thinking of bringing a substantial piece of work to IETF, then like the first thing that's going to happen when you do that is people are going to ask, well, where's your mailing list and how much traffic is on your mailing list and how much evidence of interest in that in there. And so if you're thinking of bringing like basically all the crap in red to IETF, then, or I'm not sure actually what the colors mean, but like all the things like involve wire protocols to IETF, then what you should ask for is a non-working group mailing list where you should have technical discussions about the problem, demonstrating you're actually working on it, and the community cares about it, and also start working at the charter for, for when you're going to have to come to us for a BOF, which I assure you, if you wish to bring this to IETF, it will require a BOF. So like, I guess, so figure out, I guess I would say, like, internally figure out whether you have a really small bite-sized thing or a big thing. And if you have a really small bite-sized thing, then as Colin says, it's appropriate to discuss the charter on SecDispatch. If you have a big thing, ask us for, which will happily grant you, a non-working mailing list where you can like start the process of like acting like people are in the IETF, and thus makes it easier to actually get the work into IETF.
Makes sense. All right, and then our last session of the day is Owen on ATLS.
And so I was passing around the blue sheets. Does anyone still need the blue sheet? Sorry, before you begin, and there's another blue sheet somewhere out there, if someone could bring it up. Thanks.
Okay.
Can you get the box? You could stand in the pink box.
Okay, so this is a consolidation of two previous drafts. Cisco had a draft 00 of application error TLS in for IETF100, and ARM had a draft 00 of application error TLS in for IETF100 as well. And this is consolidation of two drafts. Next slide. So what's application error TLS? The ultimate goal for both sets of use cases that Cisco had and ARM had is to establish an end-to-end encrypted channel and shared encryption keys between clients and servers over untrusted transport. Where that untrusted transport could be gateways, middle boxes, could be over HTTP, over network layer, TLS, ZigBee, whatever. The way we achieved this for both use cases, for all sets of use cases, was by exchanging TLS handshake records at the application layer between the client and the server, and doing a full TLS handshake at the application layer and establishing a TLS session, or using key exporting and establishing shared encryption keys. What we're trying to do as well is define packaging and content to explicitly identify that payload to middle boxes. So we're not trying to hide, we're trying to be very, very obvious and advertise exactly what we're trying to do. So middle box is full visibility. Well, middle box of visibility into what the payload content is. It's TLS records or TLS handshake records. So the goal today, figure out what we want to do with this work. We had a working lunch yesterday, and we had around 30 or 40 attendees. There's generally positive feedback. I'd preempt some of the questions that are going to come up. There's a couple of concerns. The primary concerns were DKG on, is this going to be turned into turtles all the way down? Are we going to have another application error TLS on top of application error TLS discussion next year? There's also some concerns raised about potentially using HTTP as not exactly reliable transport. Next slide. So use cases, this first use case, this is the Cisco use case that was in the Cisco draft. And what we're trying to do is bootstrap trust. We're actually trying to bootstrap trust in the middle box. So the issue we have and the issue we're hitting today in deployments is we unbox a device, plug it into the network. The device needs to connect to the Cisco cloud. The operator has a TLS interception middle box deployed. The box is now dead in the water, and it's a very expensive operation for the operator to bootstrap that device, as you have to manually go to the device and provision the TLS interception proxy certs on it. So what we want to do is use application error TLS to hop over the middle box, go to the cloud, download from the cloud, and the trust anchors necessary for trusting the middle box and falling back to standard network layer TLS. Next slide. Okay, so these are a couple of use cases that Hannes had in his draft, and they're now in the consolidated draft as well. And this is primarily for IoT or constrained devices. First use case is you have a constrained device talking to a home gateway to some kind of application running on your mobile phone. And the data that you need to gather from that device is sensitive. You do not want to share it with the gateway. You don't trust the gateway. So you want to establish a encrypted channel between the client and the server. There could be multiple different transport links, multiple different hops, and the simplest way to do it is, well, we're proposing that the simplest way to do it is to exchange TLS records at the application layer of the transport and establish your encryption keys that way. The second device is the second use case is very, very similar. You have a constrained device that wants to connect via gateway to the cloud. The device does not trust the gateway. The cloud doesn't trust the gateway, you want to protect your application data from that gateway. Same solution, you use TLS records to establish an encrypted channel between your constrained device and the cloud service. So when we're looking at this, there's a couple of different ways you could do this at the implementation options. The one I'm showing here on the left is where we actually establish a full TLS session and keep that TLS session active for the entire duration of data exchange, and we send encrypted data inside the TLS session. So every single encrypted data packet is sent as a TLS record. That obviously means you need to worry about making sure that all the TLS records get between the client and the server. If you're using TLS, you need to worry about the reliability of the transport layer, or else you could use DTLS. And the second option is use key exporting. And with the second option, all you're using TLS for at the application layer is 2 round-trip handshakes, and purely to establish a TLS session. Once you get the TLS session established, you use key exporting, and then you're doing application-specific data exchange using those exported keys. Next slide. And this just shows the difference in what the data layering would look like between those two options. The option on the left shows your transport layer, and there may be encryption taking place to the transport layer. On top of the transport layer, you have your TLS record headers, and your data is encrypted inside those TLS records. And on the right-hand side, with key exporting, I'm not showing the TLS handshake here explicitly, but assuming your TLS handshake has taken place, then your encrypted application data, which is encrypted using those exported keys, is transported directly over the transport layer. I think that is the last slide.
Ben Kadek. So with option 1, we're just carrying all of the data in TLS. We recall that TLS has a prerequisite, a reliable in-order data stream. And I believe the draft was, say, referring to using HTTP as potential transport that you might want to be using this tunneling over. And Patrick and Mark are in the room and can correct me if I say that HTTP by itself is not a reliable in-order transport layer. So there would need to be some work to go in to specify how to turn each one of these potential protocols you want to tunnel over into a reliable in-order data stream. And once you do that, that's all the work. You just literally run TLS because you have this stream that you can use. Whereas with the second option, where you run just the TLS handshake and do key exporters, that's a little bit less complicated, potentially, and that you only need to worry about in order and reliable for these first few messages. But TLS itself does not really expect to give you where the message boundaries are in terms of, you do need to retransmit something, what do you retransmit, and what is the ordering. And then at the end of that handshake, you just have these keys that you exported, and now you have to specify some completely new protocol to do your actual data encryption and carry your data. So it sort of seems like either way, you're basically required to do a lot of work and specify kind of a completely new protocol. And it's not entirely clear to me from the presentation that this is the amount of work you expected to do going into it. It seems like it might be more work than you're expecting to do.
So first on the unreliable transport, you could use DTLS and send DTLS records between the client and the server. And on the key exporting, okay, if you want, you could use TLS records, and it makes the reliability problem far simpler, because you only do have to worry about 2 round trips, and that makes specification of that retry mechanism really trivial. You only need to ensure that 2 packets get through.
Unless they're large and fragmented.
Well, it turns out in practice that if you, I think it's implemented, so it's like when you look at what the things are that you want to send in these request responses, they're flights from the client and server that are clearly defined, and the stack gives you clear signals for when the things start and end, because it's when it's done writing. And so you have a pretty clear idea of what the chunks are that you're handing back and forth, and their reliability properties are pretty clear. If the request in which you sent the client's first flight didn't succeed, then you haven't gotten the second flight, and the server hasn't updated its state at all. And so it's perfectly safe to retransmit that client hello in the first flight, and same on the second flight.
Yeah. I just say that is, to some extent, breaking the abstraction barrier that TLS is expecting to give you.
Pat McManus, Mozilla. Thanks, Ben. You're going to make my comments shorter, so I'll plus one of those to start with. I actually want to make some SECDISPATCH comments. I actually, in retrospect, wish I had objected to the agenda bashing, because I don't think the right people are necessarily in this room or can be assumed to be in a security meeting. I think this this crosses a lot of topics. We are fundamentally now talking about whether this is the transport protocol and its interactions with the transport. It does very little to TLS, so it has actually not a whole lot of impact to the security directly. But it is the definition of how to build an application protocol on another transport. So it may very well be an art topic, as a lot of those things are. And given that it has like all those interactions, my suggestion for this working group session is that this be tabled, and it's probably only suitable for a full IETF scoped BOF, right, to get all those perspectives in the room. The other thing, this builds something that looks a lot like an HTTP Connect tunnel, right? It gives it different names. I guess its value is that we can expect it to work today. It is still unclear to me why someone would allow this in situations where they wouldn't allow a Connect tunnel once they figured out this is what's going on. And the goal of this work is to be visible. And the goal of this work is also explicitly to annotate each message going through, which is very much like the plus SPUD kinds of work that have gone on before. So now you can attach cookies to every message and so on. That might be a undesirable property. So I would certainly want to see a much broader audience talk about this than SECDISPATCH.
So I don't think I think this solves a different problem with HTTP Connect tunneling, and I don't think HTTP Connect tunneling actually solves the issue that this is trying to solve. HTTP Connect tunneling is generally to hop over a local domain forward proxy. Whereas if we wanted to use Connect tunneling for solving this issue, we'd actually be using a Connect to hop over a reverse proxy in front of the origin server.
This is Daniel Kahn-Gilmore. So I would want to plus one both of the previous comments. I feel like there's a bunch of stuff that's mixed in here. In terms of SECDISPATCH, I would actually say not that this should go to the whole IETF, but that this should be broken apart into the different things that it does. If there's a question about how do we transport datagrams over applications, let's do that. Let's do that in the transport group. If there's a question about how do we annotate TLS, let's bring that to the TLS working group and say, hey, we want to stick more data outside the TLS packets, and we'll have a discussion about how that extension works. Maybe that discussion won't be very fruitful, but we'll at least be having it in the right place. So I think there's too many different use cases here for us to actually have a clear discussion about what this is trying to do. And so I recommend breaking it up and thinking about the transport and the security properties separately.
So I certainly don't think it's fruitful to try to design this protocol in this meeting. I think it seems to me like the questions that might be useful for the discussion of this meeting are: one, do people generally think that tunneling some sort of cryptographic protocol, a specification to tunnel some sort of cryptographic protocol, whether it's TLS or something else, over application layers is a useful thing for the IETF to be defining? I mean, that won't lead to anything complete great, but if everybody in the room hates it, then I think you know what the answer is. And so that would be the first thing I would think that would be useful to get our heads around. Then I'm hearing various. I agree. I don't think we could start this here. You could put this somewhere here and give advice. I think that this question that sort of on one hand we have maybe there should be a BOF, and the other hand we have maybe this should be dissected into pieces and parted out. Also might be useful for people to explore. So I'd encourage people to focus on those questions rather than the questions of exactly what the technical mechanics are here, which I have no doubt that with enough wrapping or slicing or whatever, we can figure out somehow to tunnel a cryptic protocol for HTTP. I mean, I'm sure that can be worked out.
This is Hannes. So as many know, I work on IoT security, and I need an end-to-end security solution. And I have not just an HTTP-based environment, but I have a mixture of different protocols. And I want to have some handshaking mechanism and then secure the application data. And TLS provides me that capability. And it turns out that it can be incorporated with existing code fairly easily. We have been passed around in various different groups on trying to do that, entertain that idea, and get that type of feedback on what we would consider both from a transport as well as from a security point of view. But every place we go to, we essentially push to another place. And it sounds a little bit bizarre going to the IETF who works on TLS extensively, that we are now being told, oh, well, maybe that's not a right thing to do. While at the same time, in a much smaller audience, where even only a fraction of security people are in the room, it's fine to entertain the idea of defining essentially a new TLS version for the application layer, just using a different encoding, a CBOR COSI encoding, which requires me to re-implement everything from scratch. I don't get that.
Kathleen Moriarty, AD for a day and a half. So to me, this sounds like it's ripe for a BOF, and I would think it also seems like it's, if it goes to a working group, that it would be one that we would handle in a cross-area way as opposed to dividing up. So what we do with that normally is we pick, the area directors chat and figure out which area should it go in if it's cross, and then partway through the working group life cycle, it could even get switched over to the other area based on, do we want an increased participation from a different area? So that's another possibility. I didn't hear anyone mention that, but I don't want that to be lost because it's a good way to manage something that crosses multiple areas.
This is Richard Barnes. I'd just kind of like to synthesize what Eric and Hannes were saying. I think the point of these use cases that Owen has presented is that we do have use cases for tunneling a security protocol over the top of the application layer protocol. And as Hannes said, the reason this is application layer TLS as opposed to using some Jose or JWK nonsense is because we are in these cases where we already have a TLS stack around, and it's simple to wire that up in the right way and grab the messages in things that you could shove into an HTTP payload. And so that the requirements of getting these use cases together with minimizing the amount of code we got to carry around is what led us to this design.
Yeah, just want to add to what Richard just said. Like, if you look at things, you could use noise, you could use signal, you could use whatever the hell you wanted to establish an end-to-end crypto tunnel between a client and a server. But if you want to do it in the least lines of code or with the least code impact to your client and your server, just use the stack you have already there. And we've just implemented in OpenSSL and on top of Java as well, and it's really, really trivial, which is why it was so appealing to us.
So here's what I think to follow up on what Kathleen said. Why don't the proponents of this get together with the area directors? I would think minimally for art and for art and security, and we'll see if we can figure out a way for you to like have to where it says a way for it for a BOF. Because I think I agree that a BOF is right.
Yeah, to be frank, though, I think this is a small enough piece of work that like the full-on working group process is probably a little bit overkill. So we might treat this as kind of a mini working group, even if we do a more BOF-like thing to kick it off.
That seems like probably a conversation we can have with ADs.
Okay, so to summarize what we heard. So first, we'll take the feedback that this was a late-breaking kind of item, and it's helpful to treat those perhaps in a different way or have careful consideration in planning, so everyone that comes here can read about these items. I heard the
Sorry about that. I was just too far from the mic. So we don't have to do a BOF. It could just be decided beforehand, and it could just be a quick startup and shut down. That's entirely possible, especially for work that's constrained.
Yeah, thanks, Kathleen. So again, we'll think process-wise how to deal with that, and then based on the discussion we just heard from the EDs, this is going to be best handled with them to kind of figure out what those next steps are. But you're going to get lots of feedback on this cross-cutting topic. Thanks.
And with that, we are at the end of our agenda, unless anyone has any other business. Last call. All right, and then in which case we are adjourned, and you can have 16 minutes of your morning back. Thank you.
Where's sector lunch? Hey, Ecker, event sector lunch now?
Yeah, oh, yes.
I didn't see you move. Fuck. So I can.
That's not a meeting room, Ecker.
Hold on. So oh.